Hey everybody, last time we left off, I believe we were going to get into a discussion of the social impact of the first industrial revolution as it relates to living and working conditions, new ideas, and new social classes that emerged during this time period. So let's go ahead and get right to our board here. And I put a list here of some of the characteristics of living and working in these early industrial towns. You know, I think we mentioned earlier that the agricultural revolution had caused many people to leave the countryside and go to these early factory towns in search of work. And part of it was because of laws that were passed as well by the government that allowed these more wealthy landowners to fence off their property, and that of course, you know, put some of the peasants out of business basically, and forced them into town. So as they went into town, they became really in large part much of the labor force in these early factories. But I just put some of the characteristics of the living conditions here: overcrowding, pollution, no running water, no sewer, disease, poor sanitation, just to name a few. In the early IR, you saw horrible living conditions, tenement housing that was not kept up. Most families lived in one room apartments, and yeah, like I said, you know, no running water, no sewer, no sanitation, no pollution. It was horrible, yeah. So, but that was the living conditions, and their life mainly revolved around getting up, going to work, and coming back home again and doing it all over again. So, you know, the working conditions really, quite honestly, weren't a whole lot better. You know, they worked 6 days a week, 12 to 16 hours a day, low pay, you had child labor. There were no laws against that. Dangerous machines, poor ventilation. Of course, you had, you know, no laws regarding any of the workplace environment. Some of the laws that we see passed today that are there for the benefit of the worker, you didn't have that in the early IR. In the second IR, we'll get to some of that, but not in the first IR. So really, you know, in some ways, you know, workers were at the mercy of the employer. And so that's just, you know, again, I just listed a few of the living and working conditions, and you could certainly go to the internet and do a search and find out many more facts and details about what the early workers had to experience. But you also saw, for the social impact, you saw new social classes emerge. And two of the classes that we talked about were the industrial middle and the industrial working. The industrial middle class, another name for them would be the bourgeoisie. They were the people that owned the factories. They owned the factories, they invested in the machines and the land and the buildings, and so they were the factory owners. The industrial working class, as the name would suggest, were the workers. They were the laborers. They were the people that worked the 6 days a week, 12 to 16 hours a day. They were the ones that worked in the unhealthy, unsafe work conditions and in the unhealthy and unsafe housing that they had. So that was the industrial working class, okay? Then you also had new ideas that emerged during this time. And one of the ideas that emerged was this economic concept of socialism. And if you look in the board here, I have this term, utopian socialist. A utopian socialist. Now, what in the world is a utopian socialist? Well, let's break down the two words. Socialism itself is an economic system that says society, and typically in the form of government, takes control of the means of production. And when I say means of production, I just simply mean the means by which you produce something, right? The land, the factories, the machines. Okay, so government takes control of the means of production with a goal of redistribution of wealth to make a more equitable society. Okay, that's socialism, all right? A utopia, of course, you know, a utopia is basically just an imaginary, fictitious place that is the ideal. It's the perfection. It's this mythical place that's out there that is the perfect society, okay? So utopian socialists rose up during this time period, and they believe that if you could just change the working environment and just create an environment that was more fair and equal for the worker, you could create this perfect ideal society. You could create a society where government redistributes the wealth, where workers work according to their skills, and their basic needs will be met, the needs of food, shelter, and clothing. That's the utopian socialists. And really, if you think about it, they rose up during this time period in large part because of a perceived abuse that was going on in society with the industrial capitalists, okay? The industrial capitalists were being accused and blamed for the horrible living and working conditions of the working class. So utopian socialists right here were the ones that are going to rise up early. And this idea of socialism, guys, is going to continue on, well, quite honestly, up to the present day. It's an economic system that is still in existence today, along with capitalism. But we're going to talk more about socialism and capitalism and the ideas of Karl Marx later as we move into the second IR, and it becomes even more prominent then. So, but we don't have time, of course, right now in this video to get into that debate, but we will get into that later when we move into the second IR. So again, hey, I didn't mention this, have my new drawings here, guys. Here is a worker in the mine pulling a cart full of coal. Over here, this is supposed to represent an individual on the clock. They're on the clock, right? They're not working in the countryside. They're not working setting their own hours anymore. Now they're working in a mine, or they're working in a cotton mill, right? And they're literally on the clock, and their life is run by the clock. So there you have it, guys, my latest drawings representing the social impact of the early IR. So hey, that's where we're at, guys. Next week, we will be moving into the second industrial revolution. So the second industrial revolution next week, and we will contrast that with the first IR. Of course, when we get to the second IR, that eventually will be filled in as well, and we'll be able to easily contrast it with the events of the first IR. So hey, look forward to seeing you back. We'll talk to you more later. Bye.